In the United States, the entire nation was captivated for the year-long drama that was the O.J. Simpson murder case. From the slow-speed chase to the trial dramas, Americans were transfixed as one of the country's most famous celebrities and his dream team of high-powered lawyers defended against the murders of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and waiter Ron Goldman. But there was much that the public never knew about this investigation. Mistakes that were made by the police and prosecution, evidence not collected and even tampered with, and witnesses who were never called. What really happened after the murders? What did the police do wrong? What did the prosecution do wrong? Would the verdict have been different if all evidence and witnesses were presented?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
On the night of June 12, 1994, at around 10:45 p.m., Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ronald Goldman were brutally hacked to death outside her upscale condo on Bundy Street in the high-end Brentwood subdivision of Los Angeles. The failure of the police to properly collect evidence and follow up with potential witnesses is most perplexing, but there were other factors that would destroy the state's case. There were witnesses to O.J.'s whereabouts as well as his Ford Bronco who were interviewed but not called to testify, and some witnesses who were never interviewed at all despite coming forward. All had information related to the events during the hours before, during, and after the murders. For example, actress and 1980s video star Julie "Tawny" Heaton knew actor Tom Laughlin and his wife Dolores Taylor. Both were stars of the cult films Billy Jack Goes to Washington, The Trial of Billy Jack, and Born Losers. Tom Laughlin was an advocate against domestic violence and lived just down the street from O.J. Simpson in Brentwood, California on Rockingham, and was a member of the Riviera Country Club with O.J., and their children and friends frequently visited each other's houses. Laughlin and his wife, Dolores, both noticed severe bruises on Nicole Brown Simpson several times over the years while she and O.J. were married. According to Julie Heaton, Tom and his wife Dolores told her what they knew. This discussion was only a few weeks after the murders, and I quote from Heaton. That night they were returning home from dinner and saw O.J.'s Bronco parked on the street 1 block away from the house on Bundy. That was around 10:30 p.m., which they thought was weird given that situation. Now, remember the time of death at 10:45. A witness who was interviewed but never called by Assistant DA
Marcia Clark
was a neighbor, Jill Shively, who saw O.J. in his Bronco run a stop sign less than a mile from the crime scene at Bundy, crossing on her right, and that was around 10:55 p.m. She said that she narrowly missed crashing into his SUV as he looked right at her, made a facial gesture, and sped away. Now, O.J. only lived a few blocks away, about 4 minutes driving time. I could see who it was, and I knew it was a football player, but I wasn't sure who, she elaborated to People Wednesday. He was yelling at another driver, "Move, move." I recognized his voice because I had just seen a Naked Gun movie. It was O.J. Simpson. The reason Shively was not called, according to the DA, was because although she testified before the grand jury, she then sold her story to the tabloid TV show Hard Copy for $5,000. When O.J. Simpson arrived home at around 11 p.m., he parked his white Ford Bronco on the curb farther away down the block instead of pulling into his gated driveway. He never did this before, and the reason was that the limousine taking him to the airport was blocking the entrance. He was late being picked up by limousine driver Alan Park, who was waiting for him at the gate, waiting to be allowed inside. He saw O.J. walk up his sidewalk as he waited, which was only 2 to 4 minutes after Jill Shively saw him. Later, the gate opened, and Park drove in, and O.J. walked to the car and told Park that he had been taking a shower. He had 3 bags, which Park offered to place in the trunk, although the third bag, a small duffel-type bag that O.J. carried, and he would not let him touch it. Park drove O.J. to LAX to catch a flight to Chicago, and upon arriving, Park was told to get a skycap to get the 2 bags. But the 3rd bag, O.J. took over to a trash can. This was witnessed by a witness named Skip Juney, who had arrived to pick up his wife. He recognized O.J. right away and saw Simpson acting idly at around 11:30 p.m. He stated, O.J. went to a trash can and plopped the bag on top, as he told People magazine. What was really peculiar is when he unzipped the bag, he pulled out a long item that was covered with a white rag or cloth and put it in the trash can. He later told this to the police, but like Shively, he was never called as a trial witness either. He also said, I think Marcia Clark forgot about me. Clark declined to comment when contacted by Fox News Digital regarding this fact. The murder weapon was never found in connection to the case, but the strange events only mounted. After the police arrived, a series of errors ensued. Detective Mark Furman had noticed a bloody left-hand glove at the murder scene. Photos were taken of the gate, the glove, at Nicole's house by the CSI team, but the gate showed nothing on it at that time. Remember this fact. A black knit cap was also found at the murder scene by Detective Tom Lang, but it was not collected as evidence. More detectives arrived, looked at the scene, but then they all left the crime scene to go to O.J.'s home, which was strange because that left no detective at the crime scene. They saw the Bronco parked on the curb just down the road from his house, not in the gated driveway, and blood was seen on the door handle and inside the vehicle. Blood drops also led away from the Bronco up the sidewalk to the back door of the house where Park saw him walk. The blood samples would later be proven to belong to both victims and O.J. This would be the prosecution's strongest evidence, but then not even that would be enough. When police arrived at O.J.'s home, they were greeted by the house guest in one of the bungalows, Cato Kalin. Once the warrant arrived, they searched the house and detectives took photos of many items that were never collected as evidence. Mark Furman walked around the back of the bungalow where Kalin resided, where he claimed to find the matching right-hand bloody glove, matching the other found at the crime scene, which was also collected. Furman pointed out a bloody fingerprint on the doorknob of the back gate to O.J.'s house that was never collected. One item was an empty box for a hunting knife that was never found. Another was an open first aid kit with bloody gauze that was photographed but never collected as evidence. There was blood on the bathroom light switch plate, and that was photographed, but the sample was never collected. A pair of black socks were found on the bedroom floor, and they were collected and examined 3 different times, and the reports later stated that no blood was found. Remember this fact later. Damp clothes that were black in color were found in the washing machine, as if just placed there, and those were not collected and processed as evidence. After O.J. was notified at his hotel in Chicago, he caught the next flight back and was taken to police headquarters for an interview. He was asked about his timeline, which conflicted with Alan Park, the limo driver, and Jill Shively. He was asked about the cut on his finger, which was fresh, and he claimed he broke a glass in his hotel room learning of Nicole's death. The interview was taped, as was procedure, but for some reason that interview tape was never called into evidence at trial. But in subsequent interviews and in conversations with many people over the next few weeks, O.J. gave many different explanations for how he received that cut. Even his former sports agent, Mike Gilbert, reflected upon the different stories. O.J. was released from custody as there was insufficient evidence at that time to arrest him, so the investigation continued every day, and the media camped out at both houses for weeks as helicopters soared overhead, congesting the airspace. 2 weeks after the initial police response to both homes, the forensic teams again went back to both locations, and this time they found blood on the doorknob of the gate at the crime scene, which was not there before, as proven by the photograph taken in the early morning hours of June 13, 1994, so they took a sample. I'll say remember this detail later. Finally, after all the DNA testing came in, the police issued an arrest warrant for O.J. Simpson, whom, through his attorney, Robert Shapiro, stated would surrender at police headquarters at 11 o'clock the following day. Why the police did not just go and arrest him like they would any other double murder suspect is still an open question. O.J. never arrived at his police headquarters meeting as agreed, and instead went on the slow joyride with his former football player friend A.J. Cowlings, which lasted for several hours until Simpson was finally arrested at his home upon his return. Inside the Bronco, they found $8,000 cash, a disguise kit, and the loaded revolver O.J. had with which he threatened to commit suicide during the long, slow chase. Simpson's elite team of attorneys became known as the Dream Team, which included Johnny Cochran, Alan Dershowitz, Robert Kardashian, Sean Hawley, Robert Shapiro, F. Lee Bailey, and others. The lead attorney at the time, Shapiro, waived all rights and pushed for a quick trial. Now, normally attorneys try and drag out a case so that they can gather as much of their own evidence and witness statements as possible in mounting their defense. Delaying a trial also forces the prosecution to eventually disclose any potential exculpatory evidence that they may have. The prosecutors, Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, called dozens of witnesses, including Detective Mark Furman, who, under cross-examination by F. Lee Bailey, stated under oath that he had not made any racial statements in 10 years. This proved to be problematic for the prosecution after he was proven to have lied about making horrendous racial statements that discussed abusing black suspects. This was proven by the audio tapes from screenwriter Lawhart McKinley, who interviewed Furman on a script she was writing, wanting a police expert. Inexplicably, Marcia Clark never objected to any of the questioning by Bailey when Furman was later recalled, and his previous testimony was challenged as the cassette tape evidence of his statements was presented in court. His situation was one of the death knells for the prosecution as far as the jury was concerned, and this was only 2 years after the L.A. Rodney King riot, spawned by the brutal beating of King by 4 LAPD officers caught on video, which went to trial. All 4 officers were later acquitted of any wrongdoing, and the city erupted in violence. The prosecution never used all their potential witnesses either to discredit O.J.'s statement that he was home all evening until he left for the airport. They failed to hammer home the timeline of events. 10:30 p.m. Witnesses reported seeing O.J. Simpson's white Bronco parked close to the crime scene. 10:45, the time of death for Nicole and Goldman. 10:56, neighbor Jill Shively saw O.J. running a stop sign in his Bronco, which was less than a mile from the crime scene. 11 p.m., O.J. returned home where limousine driver Alan Park greeted him. 11:30 p.m., O.J. was seen disposing of something out of his bag in a trash can at the airport, which raised suspicions. But there would be other problems with the case when another bombshell landed on the prosecution. Remember the pair of socks on the bedroom floor that had no blood on them? Remember the mysterious blood drop on the doorknob of the gate that only appeared 2 weeks later? Well, during the investigation after O.J. was arrested and blood samples were taken for testing, for some reason, Detective Philip Van Adder carried a vial of O.J.'s blood to both crime scenes, which had never been done before. It violated protocol. It should have been handed over to the lab with a proper chain of custody receipt, but it was not. Well, once the testing was done, it was discovered that the blood sample on the gate that miraculously appeared proved to be O.J.'s blood, but it contained the anticoagulant EDTA. However, the blood on the gloves did not contain any EDTA, but did contain the blood of Ron Goldman and Nicole and even O.J. himself. With no EDTA found in those samples, it was ruled out that either glove had been planted by the police. This is an ingredient, EDTA, that's placed into test tubes when blood is collected to preserve it. It does not appear in the human body. It is an additive. It was now also found on the socks, which suddenly had Nicole Simpson's blood on them as well as the EDTA. And remember, they were tested 3 times before and had no blood present. That was in the original laboratory reports, which then conflicted with the last report. The Dream Team used this information, irregularities and inconsistencies, to suggest that evidence was planted, and their case had some merit, and it resonated with the jury. Mark Furman was later convicted of perjury. It ultimately convinced jurors of enough reasonable doubt to acquit Simpson in the murders. But here is some more information that never made it into evidence. During my year and a half of working with Julie Tawny Catane as her ghostwriter on her memoirs, she had a lot to say about many people. She had contacted me in January of 2020 to help her write her autobiography. For almost 18 months, I took notes, we exchanged calls, emails, and had Zoom meetings. Tawny Kitaen had dated O.J. prior to the murders. In her own words, she said, "I went to see O.J. in jail, and he called me from jail many times and we spoke. I had always believed he was innocent. I did finally go there to see him in person, and we talked about how he was doing. I had already spoken to some people like Tom and his wife. I asked him why he parked his Bronco so far away from Nicole's house. He asked how I knew about that. I told him there were witnesses. He wanted to know who they were, but I did not tell him. I said, I don't know who they are. I asked if he was visiting her, meaning Nicole, that night. He said no, he wasn't there. I knew that was a lie. Then I asked him why he did not park his car in his gated driveway at home, which he always did. He said, I just don't know. I asked that because he never parked on the street. He always parked in his gated driveway. Then I asked if he did it. He smiled and said, well, they can't prove it. That was when I knew he killed them, that he did it. I never spoke to him again after that." The prosecution's long witness list included many people who knew both O.J. and Nicole Simpson, and some of the abuse O.J. dealt out to Nicole over the years was brought forward. Even Mark Furman testified that a few years earlier he had responded to a 911 call from Nicole. O.J. had smashed the windshield of her Mercedes and was still holding a baseball bat when he arrived, but she refused to press charges. Other witnesses not called were Faye Resnick, for instance, who was a friend of both O.J. and Nicole. But less than 4 months after the murders, Resnick authored a book titled Nicole Brown Simpson, The Private Diary of a Life Interrupted, co-authored with National Enquirer gossip writer Mike Walker. The DA's office felt that it tainted her credibility, and many people believe that her eyewitness accounts of abuse over the years, similar to those related by Nicole's sister, Denise Brown, whose testimony was compelling regarding abuse. Another inexplicable factor was that, since the prosecution tried to portray O.J. as a jealous, womanizing abuser who resorted to violence, they never called Tawny Kitaen, although she stated O.J. never hit her. But O.J.'s jealousy was well documented and demonstrated, according to Kitaen, after she broke up with O.J. when she found out that he was in fact not in the process of divorcing Nicole, which he had claimed. She had reunited with an old boyfriend whom she knew since high school in San Diego, Robin Crosby, guitarist for the rock and roll band Rat, following her divorce from Whitesnake frontman David Coverdale and breaking up with O.J. It was Crosby who had placed her on the cover of their 1984 album Out of the Cellar. O.J. found out about their getting back together, and according to Kitaen, he went berserk. My phone was blowing up. He showed up everywhere. Even Crosby stated in interviews as to what happened, and both his and Kitaen's statements match almost perfectly. According to Kitaen, O.J. had been following her, and he found out that she was staying in a hotel with Crosby. O.J. went to the lobby and wanted to know in which room they were in, signed in as Mr. and Mrs. Jones. A call to the room warned them that O.J. was there. According to Kitaen, he had said that he would kill Robin, and I think he meant it, but I could not understand the jealousy. We were done, but Robin was so afraid he had left out the back door after the call to the room. We did not see each other for a long time after that, and O.J. was out of control. The prosecution also failed to bring forth other potential witnesses showing his violent nature. The most controversial moment was when Assistant DA Darden had O.J. put the gloves on, but Judge Lance Ito ordered that O.J. put on sterile cotton gloves before he touched the leather gloves. Possibly because of the protective gloves and the fact that, being blood-soaked, the leather gloves may have shrunk. The gloves did not really fit as they should have. This was what prompted defense attorney Johnny Cochran to make his famous declaration, "If it does not fit, you must acquit." His longtime sports agent Mike Gilbert said that during a conversation with O.J. at his house after the acquittal, as he had always suspected that O.J. did it, O.J. said to him, if Nicole hadn't opened the door with that knife, she would still be alive. And there were interviews with Tom Laughlin where he had warned O.J. that he might someday end up in jail due to the abuse against Nicole. He blamed the death of Nicole on domestic abuse, saying, O.J. Simpson was my neighbor up the street on Rockingham. He lived at 300 Rockingham Drive. I lived at 100 Rockingham Drive. I've known O.J. forever. This is one of the sickest, sorriest days in our culture that he was found not guilty. I've told him since 1985 he'd end up in jail 8 times, Nicole cried out, and 8 times, because it was OJ and it was woman battering, but it was dismissed. The not guilty verdict divided the nation along racial lines, but it was probably saving LA from an even worse riot than the previous Rodney King incident, which is probably why the prosecution, while putting on a strong case in the public eye, failed to bring all of their evidentiary cards to the table. But who really knows? OJ served the minimum of 9 years of a 33-year sentence before receiving parole after a botched robbery in Las Vegas. Simpson died April 10, 2024 from cancer at age 76. After his release, he had moved to Florida, but spent a lot of time in the Vegas area and had returned to the public eye on X, posting reactions to current events. The O.J. Simpson case remains one of the most controversial and debated trials in American history. It captivated the nation, exposed deep flaws in the justice system, and divided public opinion along racial and cultural lines. Despite overwhelming evidence, a combination of legal strategy, prosecutorial missteps, and societal tensions, it resulted in an acquittal that still sparks debate today. Although he was acquitted in that case, Simpson later lost the civil lawsuit connected to the deaths. Years later, at the age of 61, he took part in that armed robbery in Las Vegas to steal back some of his own memorabilia. While Simpson lost that civil suit and faced legal troubles later in life, the question of what truly happened on the night of June 12, 1994 continues to linger. Was justice served? Or was it just a case of fame, race, and influence tilting the scales? That ultimately is for history and for you to decide.
Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.